All right. Hi everyone. Hi, welcome to our last event on our yearly event on with Astrobites and Earth Week 2024. With our this year's theme as students of nature, what can we learn from indigenous science and teachings to support our stewardship of Earth in the climate crisis? Today we have Mehrnoosh Tahani, who is going to talk about projects she started up a few years ago, the Open Cultural Astronomy Forum. All right, then I give the floor or the cyberspace to Mehrnoosh. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you so much, Royal. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about embracing diversity in astronomy and the Open Cultural Astronomy Forum. And I'd like to first acknowledge the lands where I live and work, particularly the ancestral lands of the Muakma Ohlone people. So as Raul mentioned, my name is Mehrnoosh Tahani. I'm a Banting Fellow sponsored by Canada and a KIPAC Fellow at Stanford University. However, the Open Cultural Astronomy Forum is an independent project. I really enjoyed the talks and the discussions in the past few days and have learned new things. And yesterday's discussion by Azad and Hilding was also very inspiring and powerful, and I really enjoyed it. So I'll be discussing a lot of things that has been mentioned throughout the weeks and from the perspective of cultural astronomy as I give introduction to the Open Cultural Astronomy Forum or OCAF. So first, I'd like to mention that I've been trained in physics and astrophysics, not social sciences or history. I'm, however, at the beginning of stages of collaborating with historians and science historians, and I'll briefly talk about the projects that we're working on at the end of my talk. So please do let me know if I misrepresent anything during my talk, and feel free to email me as well. In my talk, you may hear me also using the terms Western astronomy and cultural astronomy. I don't really have a good definition for either of these. I'm working on finding the terms that are widely understandable and using those terms, but in the meantime, I'll be using these terms. And the other thing is that I'll be talking about myself, which is not really what I'm used to. And the reason is that I want to say why I started Open Cultural Astronomy Forum. So it doesn't come natural to me. So this talk is a little bit of stepping out of my comfort zone. So um, to talk about OCAF, or the Open Cultural Astronomy Forum, I'll start by saying why I decided to start OCAF and what it actually is. And then I'll discuss our activities and how we're trying to achieve our goals. And I'll end by briefly mentioning some of the future projects and directions for OCAF that we're working on. So I was born in Shiraz, Iran. And right after I was born, my family had to move to Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. So I never really got to see the city until 2017, when during my one of my trips back to Iran, I went and visited the city. And to this day, it's one of my favorite places on earth. And it has immense beauties that I'll be talking about. So Shiraz is a city in the province of Fars or Pars. And growing up, I actually got to learn about the significance and importance of Pars throughout history. Shiraz has great architecture and monuments such as Aram Garden or Bagh Aram, the Pink Mosque or Nasirul Mulk Mosque, Rostamiye or the Tomb of Kings, and Hafiziyeh, the tomb of Hafiz or Hafiz Shirazi, one of the highly influential poets in Iran, uh, is also located in Iran. in Shiraz. So among the notable figures in Shiraz are also the Qutbuddin Shirazi and Ibn Sina or Avicenna. And Kaveh Niazi recently gave a talk at OCAF discussing some of the achievements by Qutbuddin Shirazi and his observations and correction of the Ptolemy's lunar model. So both of these figures, Qutbuddin Shirazi and Avicenna, are polymaths. So they studied a wide range of subjects, including math, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and physics. And as I was listening to the discussion yesterday, Azadeh mentioned the importance of having a wide perspective and not losing sight of other research areas as we narrow down in our research topic in astronomy and astrophysics. And I find it quite inspiring that when we look back and look at these historical figures, we see the number of wide range of topics that they explored. So Shiraz has also monuments. One is the Persepolis or Takht Jamshid, which was built during the Achaemenid or Haqamanashi Empire, when Pars was the capital of the Persian Empire at that time. So the monument was burned by an empire that conquered Persia, but the remains of it still exist. And when I visited Shiraz in 2017, I was struck by the level of knowledge, architecture, and design in building this monument. So in my quest to learn more about Persepolis, I came across the Timeline World History documentary, which I've included a YouTube link here. And they discussed the history of Persepolis and its significance. And one of the things that was really striking to me was that the stone inscriptions that were found in the Persepolis suggested the presence of maternity, paid maternity leave at that time. So something that we can now learn about. I really enjoyed the documentary, and it actually ended. They actually ended the documentary by saying that the first global empire in history was built on a model of tolerance and respect for other cultures that few great powers have ever matched. So I've heard similar stories to these growing up, and I had a great sense of pride about the place of Earth where I was born and the country that I was from. And with this great sense of pride, I also started reading poems, and I got to learn about the importance of astronomy in the Iranian culture, as Azadeh or different Iranian cultures, as Azadeh mentioned yesterday. For example, this poem to the right talks about the rejuvenation of the world or the start of spring when the sun meets the Aries constellation. So this poem is from Shahnameh or the Book of Kings. Shahnameh is a long epic poem written by the Persian poet Ferdowsi, and it actually took him more than 30 years to compile all these stories and write them. So he was actually one of the first poets who revived the Persian language and anecdotal stories that he gathered from the people. This was quite important, as in the past before this and after the collapse of the Persian Empire, the Iranians were not really allowed to speak their languages and practice their culture or religion. So I grew up reading Shahnameh, and I'm mentioning all of these just to say that this all gives me a sense of pride. So after that, as I was finishing my undergraduate studies, I was preparing to go abroad for graduate studies, and I got an email about a professor in Canada, in Regina, Saskatchewan, who was interested to take on a student from Sharif University. So I sent my application, and although I didn't have a good TOEFL score, and I did send the application after the deadline, I received a quick offer, and I decided to take it. At this point, I was the first in my family and circle of friends to move abroad independently, and I didn't really have much to compare with. I didn't have much expectation, so I moved without a lot of pre-assumptions. And I started to slowly learn about this Western world on my own. So Saskatchewan is actually home to a relatively large Indigenous population compared to other provinces in Canada. And very early on, I was invited by a friend to attend a sweat lodge ceremony. I loved their ceremony. I really enjoyed it and felt so welcomed. I was struck by the kindness that I received there. The elders spoke with me very patiently and kindly, as I was not very confident in English yet. And after the ceremony, as we sat down and shared food and passed the food one by one from one person to another, it actually reminded me of my family and friends in Iran. So I felt a deep sense of connection with the indigenous people that I was interacting with. And as I learned more about their history and how they were treated through the history, I actually felt more connections and I wanted to learn more about them. And I also learned during my academic education that the academic system and the way we teach astronomy in classroom is not really inclusive of the indigenous culture and their values and the way that they pass knowledge from one generation to another. Um, So after Saskatchewan, I lived in Calgary, Alberta, and then British Columbia, and learned more about this, what they call as Western country. So I'm assuming my internet is still working okay. I had some issues later on. So yes.
Seems to be working all right.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. So my years of living in Canada has given me a great sense of pride about this country. It's beautiful nature and kind and caring people. And I deeply, deeply love the country. I also had encounters, although not very often, but they were very or quite impactful, leading me to want to hide my identity and not mention that I was from Iran when I was interacting with new people. So initially, sometimes I was laughing and shrugging them off, but sometimes there were jokes about or hearing inappropriate bomb or terrorism jokes, or whenever I had to do extra security screenings. So I couldn't really understand what it had to do with me. And I also found by experience that the academic system wasn't really inclusive to the values that I grew up in my family with as well. Uh, so I started to think how we can actually diversify astronomy. And after my PhD, I moved to Penticton in British Columbia and worked with the National Research Council of Canada at the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory, which to this day remains one of the favorite places I've worked at. And there I was organizing the radio astronomy seminars, and I was given the opportunity to invite the speakers, and they could arrive locally and give us talks. But as it ended up being during COVID, we had to move a lot of the talks online. But that actually meant that I could invite a lot of speakers that we couldn't normally invite. So someone suggested Ray Norris, and so I invited Ray to give us a talk on his work on cultural astronomy. Ray is actually a very inspiring person, especially I've been very inspired by him. And he is one of the few astronomers, or maybe the only one, who have done extensive research, not only in current astronomy and astrophysics and radio astronomy, but also on cultural astronomy. So after Ray's talk, I emailed him and mentioned the idea of starting a cultural astronomy seminar series. And he actually mentioned that he had been thinking about the same thing. And so we decided to start OCAF. I'm incredibly grateful to Ray's support. And without his support, OCAF would have not existed. So that's how actually OCAF was born, and our goals include embracing and promoting cultural diversity in astronomy, highlighting how different cultures have approached astronomy and have made contribution to this field, not only in these days, but also throughout the history. And also understanding the role of astronomy in cultures. We keep hearing about different astronomy stories, so we want to understand the role of astronomy in cultures and the influence of cultures on our current astronomy. So currently OCAF is organized by myself and Janet Suherli at the University of Manitoba in Canada. And anyone can join OCAF. So if you're interested in joining, please sign up for our Google group as described here. So I've actually received a couple of emails by people saying that they joined, but they don't receive the announcement. So if that happens, please do let me or Janet know, and we can add you manually to the group, Google group. So just to join, you just need to send an empty email to this email address, and then confirm your subscription by another empty email. So we've had a lot of or a number of great talks on various topics. Next Thursday, we will have a talk by Natalie and Janani on choice, metaphor, and meaning in astrophysics. The time of the seminars are at 23 UTC, so we can include people from Australia and Canada and the US. But we also have the recordings of the talks that you can find on our webpage. Sometimes we change the times depending on the request of the speakers or the time zone that the speakers are located in. So after Canada, I've moved to California, and that's where I'm located now, and I'm continuing OCAF here. And one other thing that I've noticed in academia that I don't feel like it really aligns with some cultures or some upbringings or even some personalities is the idea that we constantly have to sell our work and fit in terms of the advertisement. So in North America, I found out that the advertisement of our work was quite important, and I struggled with it a bit. And I started to change myself and growing in this field. But then after a while, I realized that it's not us who constantly have to learn and fit in and change ourselves. Sometimes we need to change the astronomy culture or the academic culture to be more inclusive to different personality types, to different people, to different cultures, to different backgrounds, and to different family upbringings. And as I moved to the US, I noticed that this is even significantly more important in the US compared to Canada. So astronomy is actually the perfect field, as many cultures have studied it throughout the history to embrace diversity in academia and to embrace diversity in our field. So we have the perfect platform. It's the oldest science, according to some documents, or one of the oldest sciences. And it is a great tool to bring us together and connect us. So as we learn about astronomy, we also learn about different civilizations throughout the history. For example, it's been documented that one of the first documented civilization existed in Beinul Nahrain in Arabic, or Mesopotamia, which was after the agricultural revolution between the two rivers. And it actually had the first ever astronomers that were documented and we know of. And Sumerian was one of the first in this regions, and it was 4 or 6 millennium BC. But as we look on the stories that we learn about different constellations, we see that sometimes these stories are influenced by each other. They might have one source, one origin, but they that may go back to Sumerians as they were the first documented astronomers who mapped stars into a constellation. That we know in our understanding of history right now. But the differences in the stories tell us that these stories have been made or told throughout the history independently as well. And we can learn quite a lot by looking at differences and the similarities. We can even learn a lot about astronomy and our history. So here's a view of the constellation at Stanford in the winter in January. And some of these stories so this, as I should mention, I'm using the Stellarium software here. And some of these constellations were compiled by or incorporated to Stellarium by Susan Hoffman, who will give us a talk at OCAF on the origin of constellations. So one of the most well-known constellation that we know of is the constellation of Pleiades or Seven Sisters. And in a recent publication, Ray Norris, so Ray and Bernabe Norris discussed the history of Pleiades and discussed that throughout cultures, we constantly see that there's a story about 7 sisters that one of them have gone to hiding. And we actually, when we look, we actually see with naked eye only 6 stars. So it's quite intriguing that we do see 6 stars with naked eye. And why are these stories across the cultures, different cultures, for example, indigenous to different regions, talk about 7 sisters? So by looking at Gaia observations and looking at the velocity of these stars, Norris and Norris suggested that these stories actually could be 100,000 years old. And this is because we, with naked eye, we only see 6 stars. So one thing that is very intriguing to me is that in Persian culture or in Iran, we don't actually call the constellation as 7 sisters. We call them Parveen, which has its roots to the Avestan language, which was the language that the book of Zoroastrianism is written in, and is one of the oldest languages in Iran. And when we look at the root of language, it actually means first. And in Zoroastrianism, which is one of the, actually the oldest documented one God religion that has existed, we see that there are 2 constellations that have significant importance in this system of beliefs. One is Ursa Major, which is known as Haft Orang, or 7 marks or 7 thrones, and the other is Pleiades, which also has some association with number 7, but the associations are different. And I want to mention that in the Iranian culture, the number 7 has been very sacred throughout the history in Iran. So I'm still researching the stories behind the Persian culture understanding of Pleiades. So I won't really talk about this, as my understanding is still developing. And one thing I like to mention is that these stories that we hear are the way that our ancestors used to convey knowledge from one generation to another. And we actually use storytelling in current astronomy. So they may seem as mythical, but they were the way that knowledge were transferred from one generation to another. And we do use this in our research. So for example, I work on interstellar and astrophysical magnetic fields. And as I talk about research, my research, I talk about, I incorporate stories. For example, last week I was talking with a graduate student who I work with, and so she's an expert. So I was talking to another expert, but I was still incorporating a story to explain to her the roles that magnetic fields play in the star formation process. So I was telling her that initially, as the interstellar clouds are forming into dense clouds, magnetic fields play the roles that we may consider as enemy roles. They inhibit or slow down this process, but then after the cloud is formed, they act as a friend. They allow for mass accumulation, but they still have a fight against gravity, and they are battling with gravity, and they don't really allow for these clouds to fragment. But then at the very late stages of this process, they emerge as a hero. And without magnetic fields, we can't really form stars. So they emerge as a hero of the story of the star formation, which is a battle between turbulence, magnetic fields, and gravity. So a lot of these stories throughout the history has existed, and in the OCAF seminars we've heard many of these stories from different speakers with different cultural perspective. Wayne Orchiston told us about the East Asian astronomy, and Abiba Yamani talked about Indonesian astronomy and the stories in Indonesian astronomy. And she also referred us to a compilation of these stories from the perspective of East Asian people that I've included a link here. So we've had number of other speakers talking or discussing or including stories from different cultural perspectives in their talk. Mia de los Reyes shared some stories from the indigenous people in the Philippines. Johnson Urama talked about the Igbo calendar in Southeast Nigeria, and I really enjoyed learning about the Igbo calendar. It's one of the calendars that I learned that was very different from my understanding of calendar. Dwayne Hamacher talked about, included in his talk, stories from Australian Indigenous community, and Jennifer House talks about the stories in Canadian Indigenous communities or Indigenous communities in Calgary or Alberta. One thing that in Aviva's talk and Jennifer's talk was really amazing and inspiring to me was the creative ways they teach astronomy to diversify astronomy and to give different communities the sense of pride that they may have lost through the history. So in Jennifer's talk, one of the things that she mentioned was her background, and it actually inspired one of my colleagues as well to share his Indigenous background. And I learned that he also didn't talk about his background because all the effort that his grandmother did to hide her identity and the lost sense of pride that she had from her culture. So as we learn about indigenous cultures and astronomy, we also learn about the importance and significance of giving back in these cultures, as they are typically community-based cultures. So Bob Fuller talks about how indigenous people in colonized lands have lost their trust in researchers as their knowledge has been exploited without giving any credits to them in publication or any credits whatsoever as their knowledge has been used. Bob mentioned that giving back is actually can be very simple, and talked about his projects and how he's given back to indigenous people that he's worked with. Yesterday, there was a discussion with Hilding, and Hilding actually gave us an OCAF talk as well. And Hilding talked about how we can avoid following in the footsteps of colonialism as we build more and more telescope. I found his talk quite powerful and thought-provoking, and I encourage you to watch the recording. So as an astronomer myself who gets immense amount of joy about understanding the universe, observing the sky, mapping the sky, I do want more and more telescopes and bigger and better telescopes. However, if someone not indigenous to Iran came and built a telescope on Persepolis, I can't describe the amount of anger that I would feel. I would do anything that I can to stop it. So I'm not against astronomy. I love astronomy. I've studied astronomy and astrophysics, but there are a number of reasons that I feel the sense to protect this part of the land. So as astronomers, we should keep in mind that astronomy should be a thorough, diverse, and inclusive field, trying to preserve historical and cultural landscapes. So Mia also told us the importance of doing a little bit of research before we name our telescopes. She talked about the Magellan telescope and what the indigenous people in the Philippines think of Magellan as he attacked a native village in the region. So let's gather and cherish this knowledge before they're lost. The title of Wayne, who was the first speaker of OCAF, was "It's now or never." So I do think that it's now or never. Let's study these before they are lost. And finally, in the context of our future works and the current OCAF projects that we're working on, I want to mention that my goal is to host an exhibition including a variety number of cultural astronomy and digitized documents about different cultural astronomy. And currently we have funding from the Iranian Studies at Stanford, and with Kaveh Niazi and Kiomars Qaraghlu, we are collaborating on compiling some of the Persian and Iranian astronomy, or even the Islamic astronomy stories. And we're in the process of hiring students to help us in this project as well. And at the end, I like to humbly say that let the sky connect us and bring us together. Let's embrace our differences and cherish our similarities. And please do feel free to join the Open Cultural Astronomy Forum seminars and suggest speakers, and let us all learn together. And as I learned from Bob's talk, let's embrace the culture of giving back, and especially in the Earth Week, giving back to the Earth and what we can learn from these Indigenous communities and cultures to further respect the Earth. And with that, I'm happy to take on any questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mehrnoosh, for this beautiful talk. Right, I want to ask the audience for any questions. Feel free to speak up or put it in the chat. We can read them aloud. I can start with a question. I mean, I have a few, but I can start with one. So indeed, in our theme of this year's Earth Week, right, is this intersection with astronomy, indigenous cultures, and climate issues, of course. Could you give a thought to how you could use OCAF as a tool or as a means for addressing climate issues in general? Because you have this great framework for cultural astronomy. Could it also be used for addressing climate issues in general?
Great question. So I really enjoyed the answer that Azadeh gave to a similar question yesterday, in that we put all these efforts and make all these changes in our life as people to try to respect the earth better and make sure that we keep the earth healthy for the future generations. But then a war comes and destroys all our efforts and makes significant impact in climate change. And one thing she also mentioned was that this is not any political statement. We're not taking any sides. We just say, let's not bomb each other. Let's not have wars. If we don't care about each other and we want to kill each other, let's at least think about our children and children of children. And keep the earth healthy for them. So one thing on from OCAF side is that by including or diversifying different cultural perspective in astronomy, I'm hoping to bring together different cultures and different people. And as we find the similarities in the stories and the stories of constellations, I'm hoping to find the similarities between between ourselves, and find how similar we are and how we can learn from each other, and even learn from our own culture by learning about a different culture. So I think my answer is echoing what Azadeh mentioned yesterday.
All right, thank you. So we have a question in the chat. All right. I guess it could be addressed to anyone really. So are you in contact with Division B of the International Astronomers Union? It says, well, the division handles stuff like logistical, scientific support, and funding as well. For example, for this project, one that I think we could also use that for our Earth Week event. But yeah, also for you, the question.
Thank you very much. Great question. Not yet. So the answer is no. And I do want to make the OCAF influence bigger, so we can learn better. So this is something that I will look into. OCAF is relatively young, so I also heard on Monday, I think it was on Monday's talk by Lori about the One Sky project, and I think we can also join or help with their project. So yes, I welcome any feedback, any thoughts, and I will make sure to spend some time to connecting with different efforts of different people. Thank you so much.
Great. If there's no other questions, this actually couples back very well to another question I had. For this project for OCAF, how would you see it growing in the future? I mean, you mentioned now there's things like funding, collaborations as well, but say long term, say wildest dreams, how would you see this evolve?
Yeah, another great question. So I find the polymath throughout the history very inspiring. I don't know how they managed to learn and contribute to medicine, learn and contribute to philosophy, and learn and contribute to astronomy. So one of the OCAF goals and future goals or future direction would be collaborating in bigger scales with different fields in history, different languages. For example, I mentioned the Pleiades constellation in the Avestan language, which is a dead language now. And there may be only a few people that know the language. So making collaboration across many fields so that we can preserve these stories, learn about astronomy better, and learn about history and ourselves better. So one of the immediate goals that we have is I say immediate, but it will take a few years, is to host an exhibition that we include different cultural perspective and different cultural astronomy in the exhibition. And throughout my astrophysics projects, I always try to be as flexible as possible and embrace any new thing that comes on my way. So I have this strategy for OCAF as well. And so I'm excited to see where we are directed to and where we end up going.
Great. All right. Sure, if there's more questions.
Hi, Dr. Tahani.
Go ahead. Thank you.
I have a question. First of all, thank you so much for this talk and also for connecting it back to the previous talks. That was it was cool to know that you got something out of it. I wanted to know if after starting OCAF, if you saw kind of this shift amongst your colleagues who, did more conversations around this happen? Are you seeing a difference in how people are approaching their science? And if so, could you comment on that?
Great question. I did definitely see a shift in myself. I learned a lot about different cultures, and I became more humble in my understanding of astronomy, and more humble in terms of my future, as I hope to contribute to the or like in current collaborations right now, contributing to constructions of different telescopes. So Hilding's talk was quite powerful and important for my learning and understanding. In terms of other colleagues as well, OCAF has been very well received. We've had so from one talk to another, the number of participants varies significantly, but we've had a number of people interested in OCAF seminars and wanting to learn more and asking how they can contribute. In terms of bigger impacts, I can't really trace back and to see whether OCAF was the reason, but in Canada specifically, I do see currently, and that was one of the reasons that gave me the courage to start OCAF as well. I see a lot of effort in terms of understanding cultural astronomy by many colleagues. So that was quite inspiring for starting OCAF, and I hope to I hope for OCAF to serve as an inspiration for future efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. I do not see questions immediately from the audience. All right. Anyways, if there's more questions, feel free to contact anyone, of course. Okay, then I think we can slowly start closing the event of today. So again, many thanks to Mehrnoosh Tahani and your presentation on OCAF. Yeah, this has been a very inspiring week. Like all the events we had, all the speakers we had, it's been very It's been very we learned a lot on the way for this, on the way of this journey. And yeah, I hope all the audience we had, everyone in the audience we had, also could learn a lot. I certainly did. I think my colleagues here also did. So, all right. With this, I think we can close. And again, many thanks to the audience as well. And right, take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.